Rain lashed against the narrow streets of the city, turning them into rivers of flickering reflections. Streetlights hummed and blinked as if protesting the storm, their yellow glow caught in puddles, dancing across the cracked asphalt. Ethan's shoes were soaked through, each step squelching in rhythm with his heartbeat, a heartbeat that felt too loud in the silence of derision he carried with him. He was the black sheep of the gang, or at least that's what everyone insisted on calling him. The gang that called itself a family, but Ethan had long felt the cold gap between words and deeds. He stood under the flickering neon sign of an abandoned arcade, the smell of wet concrete and rotting paper pressing against his nose. His eyes, dark and observant, darted to every shadow. A laugh erupted behind him, brittle and sharp. "Look at him," whispered one, almost too soft to hear. "He can't even dodge puddles, man. How's he gonna dodge life?" Another snickered, voice rising, drawing more laughter like moths to a flame. Ethan's fingers tightened around the small silver locket he always wore, hidden under his shirt. It was old, scratched, but precious, a token from his late grandmother, who had whispered in his ears as a boy, "You belong, Ethan, no matter what they say." He inhaled deeply, letting the storm wash over him, trying to remember the warmth of her kitchen, the smell of cardamom and hope. The gang edged closer, circling him in a mockery of camaraderie. The tallest of them, Jason, leaned in, a smirk splitting his face. "You know, Ethan, we joke, but honestly, you're lucky we even keep you around. Nobody else would put up with your quirks." Ethan felt the sting of each word, but he kept his voice even careful. "Quirks your skills?" he asked, voice low, carrying more weight than his body, soaking wet as it was. The laughter faltered, just a fraction. Jason's smirk twitched. "Skills? Yeah, right. You're all talk." They didn't know. None of them did. Ethan had spent months perfecting his skills in silence, honing his mind and body in places they would never see. While they mocked, he observed, calculated, prepared. There was a quiet strength in him that no jest could shake yet. A sudden crack of lightning split the sky, making the wet streets glow in stark white. Ethan's eyes caught a glimpse of a stray dog shivering under a dumpster, its fur soaked, trembling. For a moment he saw himself in that tiny creature, underestimated, mocked, overlooked. Without thinking, he extended a hand, pulling the dog close. Jason's laughter turned into a bark of irritation. "What are you doing? That thing's disgusting!" Ethan didn't answer. He felt an odd serenity in the small act of care. It reminded him of his grandmother's words, echoing in the storm, louder than any jeer. "Courage is quiet sometimes." The gang's jeers grew louder as the dog whimpered, shivering against Ethan's chest. One of them kicked at the dog lightly, but Ethan's reaction was swift, a flash of motion, gentle but firm, moving the animal out of harm's way. Jason's jaw tightened. Okay, man, chill." For the first time, the storm of ridicule met resistance, subtle yet undeniable. Malik's silence spoke louder than any protest. The group's laughter now had a crack in it, a fleeting uncertainty. They had mocked him for years, but never had he truly shown the depths of his resolve. And yet, even as the tension simmered, Ethan felt an unease creeping in. Something bigger than their jeers was waiting for him, beyond the rain-slick streets, beyond the mocking eyes. He couldn't name it yet, but the feeling pressed against his ribs, a subtle warning. A sudden shout tore through the rain, sharp and unfamiliar. Ethan spun, heart lurching, across the street. Under the dim glow of a flickering sign, a man was stumbling, caught in the storm. Something was wrong. His briefcase was sliding into the waterlogged gutter, papers flying like frightened birds. Without thinking, Ethan dashed across, latching onto the man's arm, steadying him, and grabbing the papers. The gang watched, mouths open, in stunned silence. Ethan handed the man his scattered belongings. The man's eyes widened as he took in Ethan, rain dripping from his hair, eyes intense but calm. Thank you so much," the man gasped. Ethan just nodded, tucking the papers under his arm, his attention already scanning the surroundings, alert for danger. Jason stepped forward, voice low, almost uncertain. "Dude, how? How did you?" Ethan didn't answer. He knew this was the first crack in their perception, the first hint that the man they mocked was far more than a laughingstock. The stranger adjusted his coat, giving Ethan a once-over that seemed to pierce deeper than the rain. You have sharp eyes, smart hands, rare courage." Ethan's stomach tightened. That last word hung in the air like a bell. He hadn't expected recognition, not yet. But the stranger's gaze lingered, and for a moment Ethan felt seen, understood. The kind of understanding that makes you reconsider everything you thought you knew about yourself. The gang muttered amongst themselves, confused, uncertain. Their laughter had vanished, replaced by a quiet curiosity that Ethan had never seen in their eyes. And though he still wore the mask of a boy who fit nowhere, inside him, a spark of something bigger stirred. Then, a sharp whistle cut through the rain, a warning, or perhaps an invitation. Ethan's eyes flicked to the shadows beyond the street, where the storm made the alley look like a dark river of secrets. Something was waiting, something that would test every ounce of courage he had, every ounce of quiet strength he had kept hidden. And Ethan, for the first time in a long while, felt the thrill of anticipation mixed with fear. The storm raged, the dog whimpered softly at his side, and the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the moment that would change everything, because the mocking wasn't over, not by far, and Ethan knew deep down that when the truth came out, nothing, not laughter, not jeers, not doubt would ever be the same again. The streetlights flickered one last time before plunging the alley into darkness. Ethan's hand tightened on the locket again. And in that silence, he made a promise to himself. Let them mock, let them doubt. The truth will speak. The rain fell harder, the alley waited, and Ethan stepped forward. The next morning, the city smelled of wet asphalt and cigarette smoke. Ethan walked through the crowded streets, his hoodie pulled low, the locket hidden beneath his shirt. The gang followed at a distance, muttering under their breath, still confused by yesterday's events. The mocking hadn't stopped, it had merely paused, suspended like a breath before a scream. The day had started like any other, but the storm of ridicule had shifted. Rumors had spread. Someone had seen Ethan help the stranger. Whispers followed him through the alleyways, through the classrooms, through the dingy basketball courts where he and the gang spent their evenings. And with each whisper, the tension thickened. By afternoon, the gang had dragged him to the old warehouse near the docks, a place where they liked to settle things, where their cruelty often found stage and script. The warehouse reeked of rust, oil, and wet wood. Sunlight barely penetrated the broken windows, casting long, jagged shadows across the floor. Ethan felt the chill in his bones, but his heart remained steady. Jason stepped forward, his shadow falling over Ethan. "So, you saved that guy yesterday," he said, voice sharp, almost threatening. "What's the deal? You trying to make us look bad? Prove you're better than us?" Ethan's lips pressed into a thin line. "I helped someone who needed it," he said quietly. "That's all." Laughter erupted, but it was tense, brittle. Ethan noticed the unease in their eyes. He had tipped the balance. They were used to mocking him, used to control, used to defining him, and now a single act of courage had made the definition unstable. Jason sneered, stepping closer. "You think that makes you what? Some kind of hero? You're still the joke of the gang." Ethan's fingers brushed the locket, the cold metal grounding him. He didn't answer with words. Instead, he surveyed the warehouse, every beam, every shadow, every potential threat. Something in him had shifted. The quiet patience of years had hardened into alert readiness. A sudden noise, a metal pipe clattering to the floor, made the gang flinch. Ethan's eyes snapped toward the sound. In that instant, he moved, not with brute force, but with precision. He intercepted Jason's swing at a younger member of the gang, redirecting it with a twist of his wrist. A scuffle erupted, metallic and raw, echoing through the empty warehouse. Ethan didn't panic, he anticipated. Every kick, every shove, every jab was a conversation he had rehearsed silently in his mind countless times, and then it happened, the moral test. One of the younger gang members, barely 16, lunged at Ethan with a rusted pipe. Ethan had a choice: deflect and let the boy hurt himself, or take the risk and stop him. Without hesitation, he twisted the boy's momentum, catching him before he fell, absorbing the force like water. Pain shot through his wrist, but he didn't flinch. The gang froze, mouths open, eyes wide. No one had moved like this before. No one had shown care, courage, and calculated skill in the same motion. Malik's breathing was steady, calm despite the storm of chaos around him. Jason's face contorted with disbelief, a mixture of anger and admiration that he didn't want to admit. How are you?" Ethan said nothing. He simply held the locket, feeling the pulse of memory and resolve. He had trained in silence, perfected his mind and body away from the eyes that judged him, and now, in the raw, chaotic theater of ridicule and violence, that training bore fruit. A sudden siren wailed in the distance, a shrill reminder of the outside world. The gang hesitated, looking at the warehouse doors. In that brief pause, Ethan saw an opportunity. He grabbed the youngest members, pulling them toward the exit, leading them out into the pale afternoon light. They stumbled behind him, unsure, reluctant, but trusting. Jason lunged at him one last time, fury etched across his face. Ethan sidestepped effortlessly, catching Jason's arm and twisting just enough to unbalance him without breaking the bone. Jason crashed into a stack of wooden pallets with a heavy thud, groaning, his pride more injured than his body. Ethan didn't stop. He didn't look back. Outside, the rain had returned in drizzle, soft but persistent. Ethan guided the others to the alley near the docks, where the city's water lapped against the concrete edges. The youngest gang members looked at him with newfound respect, all acing their voices. How did you?" Ethan shook his head, wet hair plastered to his face. "I didn't do it for respect," he said. "I did it because it was right." For the first time, the mocking stopped completely. Silence hung between them, broken only by the sound of distant waves and the city's hum. The gang's hierarchy, the laughter, the cruelty, the sense of superiority had fractured in a single act of moral courage. But the story wasn't over. Ethan knew that. In the crowd, a shadow had been watching a stranger whose gaze lingered longer than curiosity should allow. He hadn't noticed Ethan at first, but now, recognition dawned. This person knew the story that hadn't been told, the truth that had yet to surface. As Ethan turned to leave, he felt the weight of the moment press against him. This wasn't just about the gang anymore. It was about the world outside, the way society sees the overlooked, the underestimated. And Ethan, the black man they had mocked for years, was about to step into a spotlight he hadn't asked for but could no longer avoid. The drizzle thickened into a steady rain. Ethan walked away from the warehouse, silent but resolute, the youngest members trailing, unsure if they were following a leader or simply a boy who had refused to be a joke. Behind him, Jason struggled to rise, soaking wet, pride shattered, rage simmering. And in the shadows, the observer made a call, fingers trembling slightly as a voice answered on the other end. "You're going to want to see this." Ethan didn't hear it. He couldn't. He was already moving forward, stepping into the storm, into the moment that would define him, not by the gang, not by their mockery, but by his own courage, his own truth. The city, for a brief instant, seemed to hold its breath. Something was shifting. A tide was rising. And Ethan, drenched and defiant, was standing at the center of it, because the incident was over, but the reckoning had just begun. The morning after the warehouse incident, Ethan felt a strange weight in the air. The city streets seemed different. Every corner, every passerby carried a whisper, a glance, a subtle recognition. Word had spread quickly. The story of Ethan's courage, the way he had protected the younger gang members, the way he had moved with precision and care was no longer just a rumor. It had grown, twisting and turning as it traveled, distorted by those who wanted to see him either as a hero or a threat. By midday, the gang had splintered. Jason avoided Ethan's gaze entirely, nursing his bruised pride and his wounded ego. The younger members, once timid and uncertain, now followed Ethan cautiously, unsure how far to trust, unsure how far to speak. The streets themselves seemed to watch him, the city vibrating with the tension between admiration and resentment. At school, the whispers followed him. Students who had ignored him, mocked him, or dismissed him as invisible now looked at him with curiosity, some with fear. Teachers, too, had heard fragments of the story, the fight, the bravery, the way Ethan had taken responsibility. Some nodded approvingly, others frowned, unsure how to handle a student whose actions were too complex to reduce to right or wrong. And then came the viral moment. Someone had filmed part of the incident at the warehouse, the scuffle, Ethan's protective moves, his calm under pressure. The video had surfaced online, shared across social media platforms, gathering views, comments, and shares at a staggering rate. Ethan had never asked for attention, never wanted it. Yet suddenly he was everywhere. The comments were a mix of awe, disbelief, and, predictably, prejudice. "You're amazing, Ethan. Why is this kid always in trouble? Black kid shows more sense than the rest of the gang? Typical. He's just lucky." Ethan scrolled through the comments silently, the locket cold against his chest. Some words lifted him, others cut like knives. It was the first time he realized the weight of perception, the fragility of reputation, and the power of truth in a world that often ignored it. Then came the call that would change everything. A deep, calm voice spoke over the phone. "Ethan, this is Mr. Turner. I saw the video. I need to meet you." Turner was the director of a non-profit organization focused on mentoring at-risk youth, a man Ethan had only heard of in passing. His presence in the story promised more than recognition. It promised validation, opportunity, and perhaps understanding that Ethan had never received. The meeting was tense. Turner was a tall man, meticulous in appearance, calm but commanding. He had watched the video multiple times, each frame revealing layers he wanted to explore. "You didn't just react," he said, voice even but sharp. "You calculated, protected, led. That's rare. Most people, even adults, wouldn't handle that situation without panic. You did it instinctively." Ethan nodded, uncertain. He wasn't used to being praised, certainly not for something that felt like survival rather than heroism. I just did what seemed right," he said, voice quiet. Turner leaned forward, eyes piercing. "Exactly, and that's what makes you valuable. Not just skill, but moral courage and the instinct to act ethically under pressure. That's what the world needs. That's what we nurture." Meanwhile, back in the neighborhood, the fallout was unfolding in a different way. Some in the gang resented Ethan openly, unable to reconcile his sudden rise with their previous perception of him. Others, especially the younger members, began to see him as a leader, a figure whose actions were now worth following. And in the streets, whispers of his heroism began to override the old narrative of mockery, though not entirely. Prejudice lingered, subtle but persistent, as a shadow no one could fully dispel. Ethan felt the pressure of expectation settle on him. The viral video had amplified every decision he made, every movement, every word. The world was watching now, and even small mistakes would carry weight. He realized that courage was no longer just about physical action, it was about facing judgment, navigating misunderstanding, and staying true to oneself amidst the noise. The tension peaked when a major local news outlet reached out for an interview. Ethan's heart raced. He knew that once his face, voice, and story reached a wider audience, nothing could remain the same. Some would celebrate him, others would judge, attack, or distort the truth. He agreed cautiously, realizing that this was part of the revelation, that truth, once exposed, demanded confrontation. The interview was set in a quiet studio, stark lights casting sharp shadows. Ethan sat across from the journalist, every camera lens focused, every click of a button magnifying the moment. Questions came, some probing, some subtly biased, others genuinely curious. Ethan answered with honesty, humility, and a quiet authority that belied his age. He didn't embellish, didn't claim more than he had done, yet the truth in his words, coupled with the video, had a gravity that could not be ignored. And then, the turning point, a message appeared on his phone. From the stranger he had helped in the rain, the man whose briefcase he had saved. "You are more than they see," it read. "The world needs to see the truth. You started it, finish it." That message, brief and enigmatic, struck a chord. Ethan realized the depth of his impact, the ripple effect of a single act of courage. He wasn't just proving something to the gang, or to himself, or even to the city. He was participating in a larger story, a story of injustice, of misjudgment, and of moral courage finally recognized. By evening, the neighborhood had transformed subtly. People who had ignored him, mocked him, or doubted him now paused to watch him pass. Some nodded, tentative respect in their eyes. Others whispered, unsure how to react. Others whispered, and in the background, the shadows of those who had mocked him still lingered, tense and uncertain, realizing that the narrative had shifted irrevocably. Ethan walked home, the locket warm against his chest. The rain had returned, light and steady, washing the streets clean, reflecting the neon signs, the graffiti, and the puddles where his reflection shimmered. He realized that the truth, once unleashed, couldn't be contained. It had power beyond ridicule, beyond prejudice, beyond fear. And as he reached the door to his home, Ethan paused, hand on the handle, heart heavy yet resolute. The revelation wasn't over. There would be challenges ahead, media scrutiny, public opinion, perhaps even backlash, but he was no longer the boy who simply endured mockery. He was someone whose actions spoke louder than words, whose courage could no longer be ignored. Inside, the house smelled of familiar spices, of warmth and safety. Ethan's mother looked up from the kitchen, eyes soft but concerned. "Everyone's talking about you," she said quietly. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Ethan nodded slowly, a smile playing at the corners of his lips. "I didn't do it for talk," he said, voice firm. "I did it because it was right. That's all I need." And in that moment, between the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the distant rumble of city traffic, Ethan felt the weight of truth settle into something heavier yet more freeing, a responsibility, yes, but also a promise that the world could. A change, one act at a time. Because the mockery had ended, but the reckoning had begun, and Ethan finally recognized, was ready to face it. Weeks had passed since Ethan's courage became a story that the city couldn't ignore. The streets still whispered his name, but now with respect rather than mockery. The gang that had once jeered at him had fractured entirely. Some had left, unwilling to face the power shift. Others had tried to rebuild bridges cautiously, following his example rather than their old routines. Ethan walked through the familiar streets, the locket pressing lightly against his chest. He still carried the storm of memory within him, the jeers, the doubt, the nights of silence, but now it felt lighter. He had seen firsthand how courage and truth could ripple outward, changing not just perception but reality itself. The non-profit director, Mr. Turner, had kept his word. Ethan was offered a mentorship role in a program aimed at helping at-risk youth navigate challenges, teach resilience, and discover their hidden strengths. It was more than opportunity, it was a recognition that his moral courage had value far beyond immediate circumstances. During his first mentoring session, Ethan stood in front of a group of teenagers, many of whom were wary, some skeptical, all of whom were struggling with the weight of doubt and expectation. He didn't speak like a teacher, didn't lecture like an authority. Instead, he told a story of a rainy day, a frightened dog, and a warehouse full of fear. He spoke of choice, of courage, and of standing for what's right, even when the world mocks you. The room was silent, captivated. Some faces mirrored his own past, timid, overlooked, underestimated. Others glimmered with curiosity, hesitant hope, and the quiet spark of recognition. When he finished, a girl raised her hand. "So, you're saying that even if people laugh at you or doubt you, you should still do what's right?" Ethan nodded slowly, a small smile on his lips. "Exactly. The world will always judge, always whisper, always doubt. But truth has a power that no laughter can erase. Courage isn't loud, it's quiet, steady, and persistent." Outside the building, the city pulsed with life. Cars honked, children played, vendors shouted, but Ethan felt a serene separation from the chaos. A sense of purpose anchored deep in his chest. The viral videos, the news stories, the recognition they mattered, yes, but only because they had amplified a simple truth, that moral courage, once acted upon, cannot be contained. At home, his mother watched him enter the kitchen, her eyes soft but proud. "You've changed everything," she said, handing him a cup of tea. "But remember, it's not about the recognition. It's about the choices you make when no one is watching." Ethan sipped the tea, warmth spreading through him. "I know," he replied. "I just didn't realize how far one choice could go." The locket against his chest felt warmer now, almost alive. He remembered his grandmother's words, "You belong, Ethan, no matter what they say." Those words had carried him through mockery, fear, and the storm. Now, they carried him into a new world, a world where his courage could inspire others, where the overlooked could find their voice, and where the truth, finally seen, could shift the tides of injustice. The streets no longer mocked him, they watched, and sometimes followed. Ethan noticed small gestures, the young boy in the corner smiling at him, the older woman nodding in acknowledgement, the gang members hesitating before speaking, recalibrating their respect. Each was a subtle ripple of change, a reminder that courage doesn't demand recognition, but it can transform reality in profound ways. One evening, Ethan returned to the warehouse, now abandoned, quiet and drenched in golden sunset light. He stood at the entrance, remembering the day of the incident, the fear, the rain, the moral test, and the viral moment that had followed. The memories surged, bittersweet, but also grounding. He touched the locket once more, feeling the cold metal solid against his palm, a reminder that his strength had always been within him, waiting for the moment to emerge. A voice behind him made him turn. It was Jason, older now, less arrogant, his pride softened by reflection. I get it now," Jason said quietly. "You were right. All this time, we were blind. You weren't a joke, you were real." Ethan nodded, words unnecessary. The moment itself was enough, a gesture of reconciliation, acknowledgement of truth, and subtle closure. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan walked back home. The city lights reflected in the puddles, now peaceful rather than chaotic. The storm had passed, not just the literal one, but the storms of mockery, doubt, and injustice that had defined him for years. He realized that life would always bring challenges, that people would always judge, and that the path of courage was never easy. But he also knew that one person, steadfast and true, could spark change far beyond what anyone imagined. At his doorstep, Ethan paused, looking up at the night sky. Stars blinked faintly above, cold but constant. He whispered to himself, not as a plea but as a promise, "I will continue to do what's right, even when no one is watching. Even when the world doubts, my truth is mine, and it will speak." Inside, the warmth of home enveloped him. Outside, the city continued its endless rhythm, unaware yet subtly shifted by the courage of a boy who refused to be mocked, underestimated, or ignored. Ethan sat by the window, watching reflections dance in the puddles below, thinking of the dog in the rain, the warehouse, the viral moment, and the people he had protected. Each memory was a reminder that courage, even when quiet, resonates. And somewhere in the distance, the world was watching, not to mock, not to judge, but to learn, to remember, and to hope. Ethan's journey was complete in one sense, yet just beginning in another, a life defined not by fear, but by the quiet, relentless power of moral courage. Because the black man they had mocked in the gang was no longer invisible, he belonged. And now, the story would belong to everyone who needed to see that courage, truth, and moral strength can rise, even in the face of mockery, prejudice, and doubt.